thank you for registering and for attending our event here. So this is our third workshop of this semester. And I'm going to be kind of with you here for about an hour or so, talking about the topic here is going to be scholarship and kind of the P&T process. Although, as I was kind of putting this together, I kind of found myself kind of going off into all these other little areas. So hopefully I'll stay kind of around this theme as we go along. But for those that don't know me or haven't met, my name is Josh Ruppel. I'm just actually in August now, I was promoted to full professor. So actually just recently went through the review process. So it's kind of fresh. And I survived. So maybe I can provide a little bit of survivor story there. And I've also kind of stepped into this role as the director of research just recently as well. As I said, we'll kind of be doing this for about an hour or so. Presentation, I'm hoping will be around 45 minutes or so, and then that'll give us some time for discussion. And that's something I definitely want to encourage and kind of really expect. If you have questions during the presentation, please ask. If you just want to discuss something, if you just want to throw some ideas out, please do. I'd rather kind of have more of a discussion about these topics, because as we'll talk about as we go along, and as I'm sure everyone knows, that scholarship is defined very differently in different disciplines. So I'm going to make my best attempt possible to talk about scholarship in the most broad sense, but I'm also looking at this through the lens of my own career and my own discipline as well. But so I still will try to be very inclusive in kind of how I approach this. Again, thank you for attending, and I guess we'll kind of get started. So again, raise your hand if you got questions, or even if you want to just turn on your mic and just go ahead and ask a question. I'm not going to be offended. Don't feel like you're interrupting. I'm more than welcome questions. So let's see. So I guess the first thing I want to say to kind of put a disclaimer over this whole conversation is when you're kind of really thinking about scholarship in your discipline, and especially if you're thinking about scholarship in terms of your review, like the administrative, the peer review, and the P&T, the promotion and tenure review, scholarship really should be kind of defined by your unit criteria. You want to use the unit criteria that is there, and you should. And I have I guess I didn't share the slides, but once the slides are posted, this is an active link that will take you to the faculty governance page that has that unit criteria. And I'm sure everyone's aware of where that website is, but you couldn't scroll down to the bottom of the page. There's lots of documents and lots of things, but toward the bottom, right before they give like all the headshots of the committee members, there is a list of the unit criteria. And that really should be something that if you're going through any form of review, that should be something that you become intimately familiar with, because should be the guiding document that's being used for your evaluation. And so that should be the guiding document that you're using to make decisions about the activities that you're going to engage in during those review processes and how you're building your career. Right? So the scholarship is going to be more precisely defined in your unit criteria. But if we kind of step back and kind of think about what scholarship means, because that's one of the things I wanted to try to do is kind of define scholarship. And then, because in my head, I always thought about it, I was like, well, I know what scholarship is. But then when I actually tried to define it, I was like, well, it's like one of those things, you know what it is, but you don't know how to actually articulate it. So of course, I spent a little bit of time kind of going into the internet and trying to find different, ways of, defining it. And it's kind of an interesting sort of journey there. But one of the things I kind of found that I kind of liked, and it kind of matched some of the things that the way that I've always maybe approached this, but never really articulated, was this what we call the Boyer and kind of Glassick model. And Boyer was kind of I guess, one of the first to kind of really define scholarship in these kind of categories. And I think there's a couple of different publications that were put out. One had 4 categories, one had 5. But this 5 kind of different types of scholarship, I kind of like this approach because this, I think, really kind of takes on a very inclusive kind of view of the different types of scholarship. It doesn't have to be just the kind of the classic sort of discovery-based sort of research, and scholarship that we might think of traditionally. But he also kind of tries to start defining, scholarship in terms of, scholarship that would, the like integration that is across disciplines and making connections. And then also, the scholarship of basically of application, how to take these discoveries and these integrations, how to apply them to different disciplines and different activities. Engagement as well, trying to take ourselves out of the kind of the academic environment and go into more of the public realm. And also the scholarship of teaching as well. And so I kind of look at this and, maybe I kind of even want to simplify this even more. So I kind of think of the discovery and the integration and the application here as kind of what I think, at least in my discipline, is what we'd consider to be the classic sort of scholarship that we would look at. And then engagement would be, I think I would kind of categorize it as kind of public scholarship. And that, of course, is something that we've been having a conversation about, at Upstate for a couple of years now, about how to engage and how to really promote this idea of public scholarship. And then, of course, the scholarship of teaching. And in a way, you can, depending upon how you kind of approach this, you can really think about the scholarship of teaching as just being very narrowly defined, or maybe encompassing, all these categories all at once. So one of the things I would really want to kind of really, I guess, promote or throw out this idea of looking at the scholarship of teaching as a really kind of maybe viable outlet for scholarship, and it's something that you might want to consider. Considering that we are at a PUI, at a primarily undergraduate institution, this is something that, we really should have a lot of access to the resources that we need for the scholarship of teaching, which is essentially, classrooms and students. The one thing I would encourage everyone to do is to really kind of look at the unit criteria that they have and look at this to see, is scholarship of teaching, is that something that is being supported by your unit, and is it recognized as something that is a valuable scholarship outlet? And if it's not, I would encourage you to be a part of that unit criteria discussion and make your thoughts known if this is something that you think is going to be something that should be more valued in your unit. Because again, as a primarily teaching institution, it is something that we should really really lean into as a potential outlet. So scholarship of teaching. So what are some of the things that, how can this look like? Well, one of the things that we've been kind of asked to do is like looking at open access, resources for our classes. So writing and developing open access materials could be an example of the scholarship of teaching. I know for like the disciplines that have labs, designing a new lab or a new classroom activity is something that is definitely a scholarly endeavor for the scholarship of teaching, and it's something that is publishable as well. Case studies for classroom discussions, or kind of doing more maybe classical sort of research in this area of looking at pedagogical changes and how that impacts DWF rates, retention, grades, performances, competencies, and so on. And as I mentioned before, I mean, this is one of the great things about this is that we have that resource at our disposal. We have students. So this is something that I think is sometimes potentially overlooked as a scholarship outlet. And it's definitely something I would encourage everyone to kind of think about, because this is something that where you can really start to work in kind of where the overlap between teaching and research kind of overlap, and you can start, really, exploring that area. So, yeah,
I have
Darlene.
a question about, using students as participants requires some uniqueness. Maybe we could address that later on how you handle that piece of the IRB or approval to do research within the confines of students. I know this might not be the place for it. I apologize if it is not.
No, it's a really good question. It's a really good discussion to have, because you've got two layers there, which sometimes complicate this. You've got the IRB, which is the, kind of basically the institutional review board looking at if you're doing research that has human subjects, is this something that would need to have some oversight? And typically when you're doing scholarship of teaching, it usually doesn't rise to that level. Most of these types of scholarship can get waivers from their IRB, the review board, saying that this is kind of exempt, these types of. But the other question that we always have to consider is FERPA, because if you're using student data to make some sort of, in your studies, then you need the students to be aware of that. You need to have their consent. And so really having some of that consent kind of will, of course, most likely satisfy any potential IRB issues and, FERPA as well. But that is something that you definitely have to kind of keep in mind anytime you're using human subjects, even students, because they are still categorized as human, even though sometimes they might not act like it. So, all right. Yeah, so now continuing kind of on about this definition of scholarship, and I know there's a whole lot of stuff on this slide, and we're not going to talk about all of this. So this is kind of classic sort of their kind of contribution to this model, and this is their contribution partly was asking questions, basically how to assess the scholarship that is being done. And what we're not really talking about, I don't really want to talk about how to assess scholarship, but I put this in here because when I'm thinking about a project to take on, maybe I never really kind of thought about it specifically like this, but these are the types of questions that I'm asking myself to make sure that it's something that is worth my time, that's worth the resources that I have, and so, looking at these, maybe just like the more broader categories about, does it have clear goals? Do we have adequate preparation? Meaning, do we have the skill sets and the resources that we need? If you're, the question that you're trying to ask, or the question you're trying to answer in your research, do you have appropriate methods to be able to answer that? Right? And I don't really understand why it's called significant rules, and that's from the original paper. But basically, I look at that, and it's all about kind of the outcomes. It's what are the outcomes of this? If you answer this question, is it going to really be valuable? Is it going to be something that's going to add to your field? And then of course, do you have outlets to disseminate it? Can you give presentations of some type, whether it's publishing or or whatever sort of dissemination. But I kind of wanted to put this in here just to kind of give some examples of some things that you may want to be thinking about when you're trying to build a research program or a scholarship program to help guide you into kind of identifying those programs that might be more valuable for you to spend your time and your resources to. So I know that was a whole lot with the Boyer and the Glassick model, and so I like things a little bit more simple. I like to break things down a lot more simple than that. So I found kind of a much more streamlined sort of version of this that kind of sums all that up by one of the SUNY schools that is also more of a primarily teaching institution. And they break it down to three elements. for scholarship, right? So the scholarship should result from a product or artifact that reflects one professional or academic expertise. And I really like that way that they articulate that, because it really makes sure that it needs to be part of your academic training. That kind of takes away this idea of, is it something that is maybe just a hobby or an interest, of yours? It really should be, a scholarship really should be something that is part of your profession and part of your academic, discipline. And then second, that scholarship should be reviewed by the peers in your discipline. And specifically, they recommend, and again, and this is all kind of my sort of opinion of this, I actually agree that it also should be, reviewed externally from your campus. Because I think we get into, I think there's a kind of a couple of different types of peer review. I think if it's internal peer review, I kind of think of that as more of a collegial review. And then external, that's when you might be able to get more of a, objective peer review. And I think that's kind of an important thing to really make sure that you are developing kind of scholarship that has that ability to be able to be reviewed by your peers externally. And then of course, lastly, whatever that scholarship is, be able to be disseminated in some way, kind of beyond just the campus, the campus environment. I think those three elements right there, if you keep those things in mind, I think that can really kind of be the first, the first three questions that you want to ask yourself before you're really taking on a project, or that would, just to make sure it's worth your time and your resources to be able to do that. So, so one of the things I kind of wanted to, kind of talk about here, and I mentioned in the emails, we're talking about kind of really kind of thinking about scholarship at a PY, and I mentioned this along the way. And so, so what are the challenges here? When I was thinking about this, I was kind of listing out some of these things, like some of the challenges are, okay, well, is the scholarship, kind of so-called publishable, or can you disseminate it in some way that's going to be valuable to your, based upon your unit criteria? Is it fundable? And I know I want to say that kind of in the most broad way. Are you going to be able to get accesses to resources, whether it be, money or other types of resources, to be able to support that endeavor? And the other thing is being practical. I think this is a really important aspect for us is it something that we can do in the timeline that we have, because we have such a high teaching load? Is it something that's going to be something that is doable based upon the limitations? And that kind of feeds into what I think is, kind of this competition. And this might not be applicable to all disciplines, but I know that, like, definitely in the sciences, one thing that we have to think about is, well, knowing full well that a research intensive university can do what I do in a whole year, they could do in a few weeks. So is this something that I'm going to be able to, is a project that I'm going to be able to take on, work on through to conclusion, and be able to publish without getting scooped, so to speak? And that's always something that's really kind of challenging for some disciplines, because you have to find this little niche where it is publishable, but it's not attracting the attention of more research intensive universities, so you can still have that place to still have your scholarship and still be able to be publishable. The other thing that I think that some people might think is that working with undergraduates might be a challenge, and it's because if you're working with undergrads in your research program, your scholarship program, then you spend a lot of time training those students and then they leave, they graduate really quickly. You might only have them for a semester, or maybe if you're lucky, you have them for multiple semesters. But there's a lot of turnover. And so, and that sometimes is thought of as kind of a lot of lost time. And so that might be one of the challenges. And then also just because, and I think any academic is going to be thinking about, how do I balance the three-legged stool, so to speak? How do I balance the teaching, the service, and the scholarship all at the same time? I think regardless if you're at a PUI or research intensive institution, it's the same challenge. It's just a different shaped stool. We just have more of a teaching expectation. And I think, culturally, I think we also have a pretty heavy service expectation at this university as well, which is one thing I think we need to start, kind of trying to fight against. But okay, so, what are the barriers? Well, the barriers for all scholarship, I think, really comes down to one of the big ones is, of course, time, right? Having the time to be able to engage in it and be able to do something that has a valuable outcome. And sometimes funding also can be a barrier, because depending upon the discipline, these scholarship and building and doing research and doing scholarship can sometimes be very costly. And then also access to resources. Is there equipment that you need? Are there locations that this has to be done to? Are there other things that are there that might be, barriers? And then I think I was trying to think about benefits that were kind of unique to PUI. And I think one of the things I think is kind of important is that, at least at Upstate, I see us as trying to have a very inclusive definition of scholarship, especially, recently with the promotion of public scholarship and looking through, several of the unit criteria. It looks like they are, very welcoming to the scholarship of teaching as well. And also, we do have at Upstate kind of our expectations are, are modified here. It's something that their expectations for our scholarship are reasonable for based upon the time that we do have, I believe. And I'll talk more about that as we go along. And, and part of this is, of course, just my opinion is I really think that one of the benefits of working at PUI is that working with undergraduates is a really big benefit. And I've got a slide about this later when I really kind of go this more in detail. But by working with undergraduates, I think you're actually, while you're engaging in scholarship, you're also hitting the other elements of what it means to be, this teacher scholar model. You're teaching them, you're doing scholarship, and you're doing service all at the same time. So you're hitting all three of those elements. And I think that's kind of I think it's a benefit, and it kind of you can get a lot of synergistic sort of activities out of that. So some of the kind of the strategies to kind of address some of those barriers that I mentioned, like, time, funding, and the access to resources. So that's part of what, my office here tries to help with, and that is trying to support faculty in their research and in their scholarship, and trying to lower some of those barriers. I'm not going to pretend to say that I can remove those barriers completely, but I can at least maybe lower those barriers a little bit. So we have, if time is a major barrier for you, then we have these course release programs that could potentially provide some reassigned time. Funding, we have several internal and what we call hybrid programs, and the hybrid programs are those that are funded sometimes partly throughout the state and partly through Columbia, or maybe just fully through Columbia. And then access to resources, and I see this as, depending upon that resource that you need, sometimes collaboration can be a very important outlet to be able to access those things that you might not have access to here. So I sent this PDF out earlier. This is something that I know that I remember back when I was just starting here, and I went to some of these workshops that Dr. Pilgrim ran, and I remember she had some sort of version of this, funding matrix that she shared. And so, I kind of recreated something that's similar to it, because I thought it was a really valuable tool, because looking at the different programs that are there, so I kind of try to color code them. The ones that are kind of in this kind of the reddish color here, these are the ones that are the so-called hybrid programs. These are the ones that are funded through Columbia. So we have the RISE, the Aspire, the Magellan Scholarship. There's also the Magellan Voyager and the Magellan Mini Grant. I think these two programs are probably underutilized, because since they have the name Magellan, I think a lot of people, a lot of faculty, and students think that you have to have a Magellan Scholarship to get a mini grant or to get a Voyager grant. And that's not true. Those are actually separated from that. Their Magellan programs are just the programs that are funding their the undergraduate students. So the Voyager is a kind of a travel grant for conference travel for students, and the mini grant is, I believe, funds up to, I believe, $1,000 of supplies for undergraduate research. And all of in the PDF and on here, you'll see that there's active links here to those programs, so you can get more information. But just to kind of go, and then of course the green ones are the ones from here from Upstate, and I also included TAPS as well, because TAPS can be used for scholarly endeavors. It can be used for supplies, and we typically think of it as using it for conference travel or or other travel for us, but it is something that we can use for scholarship as well. You see that there's a multiple outlets for funding for the potentially getting course releases. Those would be RISE and Aspire, course reallocation, and even the scholarly startup as well. And of course, this also kind of explains, if you want some summer salary, the faculty salary, it gives you some options here where you can find that. Of course, if you want to pay a student, if you want to work with a student. Some of the travel here, the ones that I have starred, those usually have restrictions that the travel has to be related to the research that they're doing. It's research required, not just general conference travel. So typically, if you want to do general conference travel for a faculty, that's going to be TAPS. And if a student if you want to fund a student going to a conference, that's going to be our Student Travel Award or the Magellan Voyager through Columbia. And I also put, on the other side of that PDF, or the second page of that PDF, is just showing the deadlines that we have here. We don't have a set deadline yet for RISE and Aspire, but those have historically been have due dates in December or January. And I believe that the RISE call for proposals will be coming out in the next week or so. So that should be so we should be able to confirm that deadline soon. So concerning kind of course releases, one of the things I would encourage everyone to do is to, if you're seeking a course release, or you have a course release, or you want to use one, plan ahead. Right, the schedules are made probably earlier than you think, and so you really need to start discussing with your unit chair, your dean, probably the semester before, really as early as you can, because you have to consider those semester schedules. And they need to work out to see if there's any course coverage as well. The other thing you want to keep in mind is you may want to look into, ask your dean or your unit chair, what's the policy for doing independent studies, or or any research courses that you might offer to. What's the compensation for that? Because some units have an idea. If they have a certain number of independent studies that they've done, they might, kind of earn a course release. So, talk to your unit and to your dean, and, kind of find out what that policy is. And so you might be able to kind of earn your way to kind of a course release. And that's going to be kind of unit dependent. The other thing that I would kind of encourage you, if you're at a point in any time where you're seeking out external grants, those are going to be, outside of the system. I'm not talking about RISE and Aspire. I'm talking about completely outside the university system. I would really encourage everyone to think about leveraging those grants for additional time for course releases. This is what I've done every time I've submitted a external grant, I always go to the dean and I ask them to write a letter of support that I can put with that submission that outlines some reassigned time. What I've been able to get in the past, I've been able to get basically one course release per year of the grant. And some grants that are out there, some grants actually require that reassigned time as part of the grant. But whether or not it requires it as part of the grant, I would really encourage you to do that, so that way you can ensure that if you do get that grant, that you have the extra time that you need to work on that, or to work on those projects. Right. The other thing, again, I kind of mentioned collaboration. One thing I'd kind of say is that review your unit criteria when it comes to collaboration. You really want to, because depending upon the unit, depending upon how they look at collaboration and co-authorship, that might impact the value of your scholarship. So kind of, make sure that your unit criteria doesn't somehow change the value of your scholarship if you are collaborating, right? And if it does, and if you're not happy about that, then of course get involved with your unit criteria committee and get your voice heard. That's something that I think is really, really important for all faculty to be a part of. Since that's what we're being used to be evaluated on, you definitely want your voice to be heard when those criteria are being made. You can explore potential collaborators at R1 institutions. This is fantastic to gain access to resources. Like, we've got Clemson, we've got Columbia, we've got other institutions around the area. They might have access to funding. You might actually be able to get written onto a grant that you're collaborating on. And of course, there you also have the potential for access to graduate students. Okay, so there's potential lots of different ways that collaborations with people, with folks at an R1 institution might open up access. Okay, and then also peer institutions as well. This is something I've done in my own career that I've really benefited a lot, because I've been able to leverage kind of compatible skill sets with peers at other institutions that are at PUI. So Nicole Snyder at Davidson College has been my collaborator for about 15 years. We met in grad school, and we've been working on projects ever since there. And I kind of mentioned here, it's literally has been the most successful adult relationship I've had outside of my marriage. So, and it's something we continue to work on. I mean, we just this past February, we submitted another, NIH grant to try to support our work. And, we're going to be meeting next week to talk about, the next grant or the next project or whatnot. So it's one of the things that's been very helpful, because we've been able to really work together. We have similar skills in some ways, but very different skills. And so we're able to help increase the reach of each other's scholarship in a really, really productive way. And it's been very successful for both of us. So, I guess to kind of talk about just kind of in general, how you might want to think about trying to find scholarship, is I kind of look at this as, maybe looking at this in, 3 things that you need to maybe kind of big kind of things you need to think about is that, does that scholarship have value? Of course, make sure it's interesting to you. And also, do you have the skill set to be able to do that scholarship? So when you think about value, does it fit within that unit criteria? And does it hit those 3 kind of categories that, in that SUNY Canton, definition of scholarship, I think is a good way to start asking those questions of yourself. What interests you, Are you willing to do this without being compensated? Because we know that a lot of the scholarship we do is something that we're not going to be compensated for, and it's going to be something that's going to be kind of extra on top of things. So is this something that's really interesting you? Is it something that's going to be, it'd be something you do for fun? Because you want to stay, of course, you want to try to stay motivated through the process as well. And of course, the skill set, is it achievable within the limitations, especially, within the limitations of the type of institution we have here and the access to resources that we have here. And I think that's where collaboration can really expand, because, you can really expand that skill set by collaborating with others so you can, so you can really have kind of more overlap there and you have more options. So another thing, kind of thinking about scholarship kind of in general, what I have always tended to do and it's been pretty successful with it, is I tend to gravitate toward projects that I can break into a lot of what I think of as kind of mini projects. And I think about those as things, so projects that are achievable in a semester or less, because I work with a lot of undergraduates and I want to know that I can have a project that an undergraduate can do and accomplish something in a semester or less. And the idea here would be that that sort of mini project would also fit within the umbrella of something, a much bigger research program. So, and in the perfect case scenario, each little mini project might be publishable in some way. Might not be a great publication, but maybe it's publishable, right? And then maybe several of these projects, if they work out, maybe they can be combined together to lead to a much better publication. And I've always kind of had my eye on trying to make my projects in the scholarship and trying to make them in kind of this modular sort of fashion. And what's important for at least my discipline is that I need to find ways to reduce risk, because there's a lot of projects that we take on in the sciences. The sciences sometimes have a very high failure rate. Right? That's what science is all about. You just have to fail a whole lot, and then eventually you'll get some sort of outcome. So being able to break these up in these modular projects, that if one of the projects doesn't work out, that's fine, because I have 2 or 3 others that might be going on or might be up for the next semester. So that way things can keep on going, and I'm not necessarily ever hitting a wall where I basically am completely shut down and I have to start completely over. And that's one thing that's I think has helped me to be continually productive on the scholarship side of thing, is kind of taking this sort of approach to scholarship. Right? So this is our 3 areas, right? I mentioned this before. I really try to do everything I can to stay in this area where you're overlapping between all of these 3 areas. And some of the things that are really important to think about is that intersection between teaching and scholarship. Of course, that's the scholarship of teaching area. And then the public scholarship areas, when you're overlap of that service and scholarship. And then also, of course, service learning is where you're overlapping the teaching and service. And those are the things that maybe think about is, how can I work in those areas, because you're being more efficient with your time in taking on those activities that are maybe checking off a couple of boxes when it comes to the review. Of course, you have to be careful about not trying to double dip, so to speak, or try to use one activity too many ways. But if you think about the way you could do this, is the public scholarship itself. Well, the scholarship could be the outcome, the report, that's something you can claim as scholarship, but then the activity that was undertaken, that could be considered to be service. And so there are ways to package this so it is kind of counting as both scholarship as service, without claiming the same activity in 2 ways. All right. And so we're going to actually have a future SARS Professional Development Series presented by David Marlowe on November 18th, so it's going to be a ways away, but he's going to give a presentation that focuses on public scholarship and service learning. So if you're interested in getting involved with that, I definitely encourage you to attend that. David is our guru on those things, and so he'll be able to talk more in depth about that. Going back to that, I kind of mentioned this before. Mentoring undergrad research is something I've been very much dedicated to in my career and absolutely passionate about. And that might not translate to every discipline, but if you think about it maybe in a broader definition, if you want to think about just providing experiential learning, doing experiential learning, and also connecting that with scholarship, right? If you can do that, I think that's where you really are hitting that overlap of all of them, right? You're hitting the teaching, because engaging the student, teaching them the techniques, teaching them the methods, That is a teaching activity. The scholarship, again, I think of the scholarship always as like the outcomes, the presentations, the publications, the dissemination. And then the service, depending upon your unit criteria, mentorship, advising, helping students with career readiness, letters of recommendation, all these types of things can count towards service. And so at least for NSC, mentoring undergrad research, you're really hitting all three of them, and you can really be very efficient on being able to do activities in all three of these areas to get to be able to build your file. So, and I think that's what I've been kind of talking about this whole time, is to kind of my approach here has always been being very strategic and purposeful with every activity I'm taking on, whether it be scholarship or service, and even teaching as well. I'm always thinking kind of long-term sort of planning about how to build this. I'm always asking myself when I'm taking on something, is it satisfying my unit criteria? Is it going to help me meet expectations or exceed them? Is it going to also help me build the career I want? Is it going to take me in the direction I want to do when I'm going to go? And, while I'm asking myself those questions, I'm also trying to protect my time. And I want to seek out those high impact activities, those activities that are working in the intersection of those areas, and also allowing ourselves to say no. And I'm saying this kind of in the context of service, because I know service is an important part of being an academic, but we don't have to do every service activity that's put in front of us. Right? We need to allow ourselves to say no. We can inform. If we have our unit chair or dean not asking us to serve on something, we can always try to beg off of that by saying that we're committed to these other things and these other endeavors that we have to do scholarship, because they're always going to ask, but you're still, even if you overload yourself with service, you're still expected to do scholarship. So you have to be able to protect your time and be willing to say no, right? Or, and also make sure that you're engaging yourself in the service that you think is really important to you, and the service that will help you build your career. Some of the things that I really kind of put an eye toward when I was going through, kind of working toward full professor, is making sure that I had a chance to get on P&T and serve on the promotion and tenure committee, because that was very much in my best interest, because I wanted to get more familiar with the whole process so I could be prepared for it when I went up for full. And so that was something I sought out, and also working on peer review committees as well. So there's some things that you might want to think about. I know it's sometimes hard to say no, and I know there's places and times where we can't say no, but try to protect your time as much as possible, because that's probably one of the biggest barriers that we're all facing when it comes to scholarship. And also, of course, seek out mentors. Don't think you need to go it alone, right? I was the chemists that are in NSC are a great group. They were all of them really served as kind of mentors in different ways to me. I know Chris is in here on the meeting, and he's definitely one of the people that I was able to seek out for advice and ask questions to, and that really helped things along the whole process, because again, it's just trying to save some of this time. I don't have to recreate everything. I don't have to do everything alone. So that's one thing that I want to kind of let everyone know that's in here, is that's something that I'm willing to do. That's something that I really want to try to expand this office, and what it can do is to really, kind of offer my services as a mentor for faculty. If you want to, just feel free to contact me. You can call, email. You can set up a meeting. We can talk about planning some things. Talk about advice. You just want to bounce some ideas off me. Just have someone to, throw around some ideas. No problem. We can get down into some more details. We can talk about, how funding scholarship and strategies of that. We can talk about, reviewing proposals and putting that together. And also, like I mentioned before, I spend I've dedicated a lot of my time in my career to mentoring students. So if that's something that you want to get into, or if you want to work more toward that, definitely, talk to me. I can give you some of my insights of my own experience there. But yeah, just feel free to reach out, and it's just something that I'm excited to do, and it's something I definitely want to really provide that to the to faculty. So I wanted to kind of spend the last few minutes here and just talking about scholarship and the P&T process, and now the post-tenure process, because that's got it's been having a lot of conversation, and I think that the perception is that it's some sort of this impossible sort of adventure that we have to go on. We have to cross the crocodile-infested waters and have to climb the highest mountain, and that this is the only way to get success, is to get to the absolute top. And I just want to kind of bring that down to reality, that might be some of the impression that some faculty have, but the reality is that it's not that, right? If you look at our faculty manual, the requirement for tenure or promotion to associate professor is that you have an effective contribution to scholarship. That's the standard, the effective contribution. Same thing with post-tenure, right? It's effective contribution to scholarship. Promotion in full, it's a little bit different. You can be effective in service or scholarship, and then highly effective in the other, right? So you can kind of choose. But again, the baseline expectation across all of them is you have to be at least effective. Of course, we probably want to be a little bit more than that, but we have to at least make sure that we are meeting expectations. So if you look more into the faculty manual, they give you these definitions of what is highly effective and effective, but those really are not useful, right? And I say that because you have to look at how you're being reviewed, which is your unit criteria, to find out exactly what effective means in your unit criteria. So the faculty manual, these definitions don't really give us anything that's useful. We need to use, again, the unit criteria, because the faculty manual does state for all reviews, faculty are evaluated based upon the criteria established by the members unit. Right? So you got to use your unit criteria as a guide. Right? And because of the post-tenure review, every unit is going through some sort of review process or of their unit criteria. So I want to encourage everyone to get involved with that, so you can have your voice heard as that unit criteria is being made and revised, because that will impact you. That will impact how you're being evaluated, and you want to make sure that you get your voice heard as when those unit criteria are being developed. Right? Because I really think that the reality here is that I'm not saying it's going to be easy. I think you still got to traverse the crocodile-infested waters, but success can be here too. I mean, yeah, success is also at the top of the mountain. You can do that, but that doesn't have to be what everyone has to achieve. There are different levels of success that you can take on when it comes to scholarship. So kind of keep that in mind. Try to keep a more realistic idea of what the expectations are, so you can focus first on meeting those expectations and then freeing yourself up to then exceeding them. Letting your career kind of take in a direction where you want to take it. Right? So a couple of examples here of the unit criteria and how they're used. Psychology is probably one of the most defined and most uniform sort of unit criteria that are out there. It is extremely clear. This is the kind of the screenshots of their scholarship areas, and if you see kind of here, they spell it specifically what their faculty need to do. To be effective, they have to have one peer-reviewed journal and one mentored student scholarship. And that is part of this section right here. And it gives you all of these kind of menu of options. That's their absolute baseline for effective. You get a publication and you do some work with a student and you have achieved the expectations for P&T, right? Now, and then they also outline how you can get above that, or how can you exceed expectations. And again, they give you an idea of what kinds of things you'd want to work toward and build upon, right? And that's a very uniform sort of, and it's very defined sort of unit criteria because I think it's a very uniform sort of department. When we go to like natural science and engineering, where I kind of originate from, we have the chemistry major, we have the biology major, so we have those faculty. We also have faculty that are not part of the major. We have the geologists and the physicists. So our criteria we had to kind of take a little bit different model. So we have kind of like this more of like an a la carte sort of menu, and we have these different rating levels of different activities and the different value of these activities. But we still have a fairly defined with a little bit of interpretation there. We have a fairly defined way of how a faculty becomes effective. And essentially, if you read this, it's one peer review publication, and then a collection of other other activities that are engaging in scholarship. Okay? And so again, we're very clearly laying out exactly what faculty need to do, and then beyond that, then there are ways to be able to become highly effective and excellent. One of the things that I did for my file, and I did this for both my promotion to associate and to full, is I took those unit criteria and I used this as a template to build my file, to build the justification for my rating in my file. So every one of these headings, the uniquely valued, most highly valued, and so on, I listed any activity that I had engaged in under those headings during the review period, and I listed them all out. And then essentially, then at the end, I basically, just made the case that based upon this metric that we have in the unit criteria, they say it's excellent as this rating, and I've done all these things, and I think I have met that. And I maybe Darlene can say something about this, but I think this really helps the review process, because since we are using the unit criteria as the evaluative tool, if you help the evaluators so they can see how these activities relate to the unit criteria, it's very helpful, especially when you're at the P&T committee, when you have a lot of people that are outside of your discipline, and they might not quite understand what a conference presentation is and how that relates to scholarship. And so being able to clearly define it, have it nice and organized, can sometimes really help that evaluation process. So there's no confusion there. Right. So now that you know how to meet expectations, hopefully this will help you kind of lower your blood pressure and kind of sleep better if you're having a lot of anxiety about the P&T process. But now that if you've met that effective rating, if you met the expectations, now I think that's where you can be free to kind of let your scholarship and your projects that you're taking on kind of go in the directions where you want them to go. You don't potentially have to feel that pressure that you have to publish and you have to have these outcomes. So you can engage in all this and then maybe have less pressure. And of course, anything that you do above is now exceeding expectations. And of course, it's going to make the whole process of your review sail by even smoother than it already is. And hopefully you've got more time then to pursue those loftier goals, which might be, getting some of that external grants. And I say that because all of those barriers that we talked about before when it comes to scholarship, that obtaining external money coming in, that's one way to get rid of a lot of those barriers, because those grants can provide that time, provide the money, and provide the resources that you need. And it becomes kind of a very different experience in trying to do scholarship if you have that level of support. Of course, there's some expectations that go along with it. So that's the one thing I always kind of joke about every time I write a grant. It's like, well, so if I get the money, now I have to actually do the work. But it is one of those things that you have to make sure that it really is something that you're really interested in and passionate about, so that you can really start devoting that time to it. So I kind of wanted to wrap up by just kind of transition into talking about next week's professional development series that is being presented by Elaine. She's going to talk about proposal writing. So basically, how to get the money, how to write those proposals and how to get them funded. And that's going to be on next Thursday. And it's actually at not 1:30, right? It's actually at 2. It's actually at 1:30, not 2:30. So cross that out, and it's actually at 1:30. But yeah, thank you again for your attention and your time. I'll stick around and answer any questions. I know I kind of went a little long. I know I said 45 minutes and I went about 10 minutes over there, but I'll be more than happy to kind of stick around and have any, follow up on any conversations and answer any questions. So thank you.
Hey, Josh.
Sure.
Darlene.
Yeah.
Would you mind if I use some of your information from your slides for my presentation for the School of Nursing?
Sure. Yeah.
I'm doing exactly what you just did.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. No, I will email you everything. I tried to be, as you saw, I tried to be fancy with a little bit of animation there. So feel free to take some of that out.
I have some of that done, but some of the information about scholarship, I hadn't finished yet. So this helped fill a big hole. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I will make a note to send you a copy of the slides as soon as we're done here. Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem. So
great presentation.
Thank you. Any other questions or anything that people want to discuss about kind of approaching scholarship or how to prepare files? I know that the peer review, the 3rd year files are going to be due October, I think the 1st of October, and I think that stuff is coming up along earlier. So yeah, Katina.
Yes. So I'm curious for you what advice you might have. Let's say if you're working because the university has 2+2 programs, and typically the people in the 2+2 programs, mature individuals, they're working. They may not necessarily have time for you to maybe engage them in scholarship of some kind, but I'm curious from your perspective, what are some ideas you might have, for those kind of students?
Yeah, actually, when in chemistry, we actually have, not formally that, because we have these pharmacy students that will come in for like a couple of years and then they'll go off to pharmacy school. That's always a big frustration because we've invested a whole lot of time and energy and then they go off and they never graduate or they're never counted for us, right? But it's one of those things that I try not to be very picky when it comes to the students that I work with at what level are they. I prefer that they've had organic chemistry because that's what we do. But I've worked with freshmen that maybe Dr. Bender has said, hey, this person's really great, as from a recommendation. So I try to stay open to working with freshmen because the way that I've approached working with students is I don't really care about GPA. GPA doesn't tell me anything. I don't use that as a way to look at it because what I really want is I want a student that is engaged, that's passionate about what they want to do. I always tell students, I never want to have to drag you into the lab. I want the opposite. I want you to come get me in my office and drag me into the lab so you can show me something. And I tell them, if you show me that passion, I will be excited to work with you. But I need to see that. And so it doesn't matter if they're freshmen, they're sophomore, whatever. If they can show me that, if I can get that sense from them, I'll do it. And the other thing is that we just have to accept that when we do work with students, we're going to be training them. We have to spend a lot of time training them. And that's just part of the process. And so, depending upon your, I guess, what type of research you do and the type of projects, I always try to make sure that the training activities somehow spin off into the start of their project. so they still feel connected to it. They still feel that they're doing something valuable, and they're not just doing something, like a one-off, and it doesn't matter. And sometimes that works well. Sometimes the project doesn't really lend it to it, but it's one of those strategies that I've used, and because that's the one thing that I think that is really helps with working with students. The faster I can get them to take ownership of their project, that as soon as they do that, then I have to worry about them less. I know that they're going to be completely and absolutely engaged and fully committed to everything. And the faster I can get them committed, that's golden. And I've got a free research student for a couple semesters.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're a freshman, I might have them for 4 years, right? So, yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. One more question. I know others have questions too, but I've worked with Melissa as well as Elaine, so I've always appreciative of their efforts to help with the proposals and stuff. I'm curious for you. I know you probably have been here longer, so I don't have a lot of experience. I'm starting my 4th year here.
Mm-hmm.
So that just to give you where I'm coming from this question, do you, from all the years of yours being here, or maybe I'm making a wrong assumption that you've been here many years, but
I've been here for 10 years. So yeah.
So excellent. Do you find that there's a lot of support from at the unit level, meaning that classes have to be scheduled, and sometimes you are a junior faculty, you've got to teach 3-4 classes a semester. So then where do you fit in all these other things? Or do you find that the people above you were really supportive of your service? Well, not more so for service, but more for the research, the scholarship aspect. Things.
Yeah, I'm the culture that's in NSE has been extremely supportive of all of our junior faculty. That's what we really try to. I've been in so many conversations. I've been the recipient of that. I've been in so many conversations over the years, kind of later in my career, about how do we prioritize, and how do we support the junior faculty. And that's the culture in NSE. And the chemists have been absolutely fantastic for me, because I have used course releases and reassigned time just about every year of my career here. And so that means, poor Chris, he's had to juggle the schedule and try to figure out coverages. And, I know Sarah Caldwell has been kind of at the butt end of all that, where she has to kind of change her schedules. It almost seems like every year to try to cover whatever class I don't end up teaching. But that's something I've been very blessed with, and I'm very appreciative of that the chemists and NSE has been very, very supportive of that. I've also made sure to try to, as best I can, to communicate with Chris and with Ben, and let them know when these things are coming up so that they can do some planning. I try to do my best to kind of blunt some of the impacts, to try to be willing to like with Sarah, if she has to pick up an organic lab, I always try to work with her of like, okay, well, if I'm giving up one of the labs, then maybe I can take another time that's better for her, just to try to make her schedule a little bit better, So I think that trying to communicate with those that are around you, to kind of let them know kind of what kind of support that you need, and let them know that you're going to do your best to kind of work with them, to kind of to allow them to help you. I think that's kind of that's one way that you can kind of start those conversations. Yeah. So hopefully that was helpful.
No, absolutely. Thank you.
Any other questions? Anything that comes to mind?
I think Schwang has her hand up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, Dr. Upo. I'm Shuang Hanli. Thank you for that presentation. That was really, really helpful. I don't want to like take up too much time, but I'm wondering if you have any advice. You work with a lot of students, and I've been finding that kind of frustrating because like students tend to be enthusiastic in the beginning, but I feel like the following through part is really, really hard. So I'm wondering if you have any experience you could share. Thank you.
Yeah, it's that's always been the big challenge, is how do you maintain that enthusiasm, especially, you know, when it's really challenging, you know, in the, you know, for my discipline in the research lab, because, you know, we'll sit down and we'll create this, you know, this fantastic plan and this fantastic project, and then we'll get in the lab and do it, and it completely fails, like completely, like just absolute can't happen, you know. And how to help them navigate that idea that it's not a failure, that it's just, you know, the engaging in science, and then that's just part of the process, and to try to get them excited about trying again. And that's something that I try to do with in my discipline, is just trying to get them, try to take that excitement that they have and try to kind of funnel it toward the process. Try to get excited about the process, about asking the questions, you know, seeking out the answers to those questions, and instead of being so focused on that one event. Because if that event or if that activity doesn't work out, then they get crushed, you know, and they don't want to, and they don't want to come back. So that's what I've always tried to do, is just try to help them try to focus on what I think is the bigger picture, and maybe help them, you know, kind of focus that energy on that. But yeah, that's the big challenge of how to keep them engaged and excited. I also try to, when I really see a student, if they're starting to pull back, I try to, you know, and if I start detecting that, I'll talk with them one-on-one, and I'll try to find out if there's something going on, if there's a reason kind of behind that. Sometimes there might be some things that are happening personally that's going on. You know, I've had students that, you know, were in research, and then halfway through they decided that it wasn't a good fit for them. And that's fine. But I need to have that conversation, because maybe it's more important that for them to step away from the research activity and maybe do something else. And some of them have even, you know, changed majors, because they're like, yeah, this is not what I want to do. I'm actually much more interested in doing something very different. And that's I think that's always been really important, that anytime and this is for everyone, right? When we get experience, we learn something. And for the students, when they're getting the experiential learning, these research activities, these scholarship activities, they're learning about what they are interested in, what they're not. And so if they are no longer interested, I try to find an exit strategy for them, because it's not worth their time to force it, and it's not worth my time to force the activity anymore. Now, sometimes that gets a little complicated if it's like for a research credit or an independent studies credit. But there are things that I've worked with students. I've shifted them from like a lab activity to like a literature activity. That would maybe be something more that they were interested in, and so they could still satisfy, you know, the credit requirement. They still give me something that is gradable or something like that. So I try to work with those students if they really truly just are no longer interested and they want kind of out. Because again, it's not worth, I don't think it's worth our time to put the square peg in a round hole, you know, or, you know, also helping them find another experience, right? Another project to work on, maybe with a different faculty or maybe a different major, to try to help find a better fit for them is good, because it's a better use of their time. It's a better use of our time. So hopefully that helped.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
No problem. Any other questions?
Thanks for coming, everybody. Hope to see you next week.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.